Welcome to Great Northern Cascade Division in N-Scale. My name's Ian. Now that I've got the helix built in one of the previous videos to connect the upper deck and the middle deck, I thought it would be fun to take a train all the way from Seattle down into Skykomish, kind of do some visual shots along the way, and also explain what's going on. There's been a bunch of new people that have joined the channel and followed along, so thank you very much to everyone who's subscribed, is checking things out. And so if you haven't seen much other than some of the more recent ones, things like that helix build, this is a multi-deck layout, 3 decks, loosely going from Seattle out to Spokane about the mid-1950s, following what would have been the Great Northern Line, up to Monroe, Skykomish, across to Wenatchee, and then very, very briefly flying through Eastern Washington in model form. But taking a lot of modeler's discretion, it is a freelance layout. It's not a prototypical layout, although I lean heavily on the prototype. I am doing a lot of modeler's discretion. Rule number 1, it's my railroad. I'm taking the easy route in some places, but it's also I don't need the complexity of some of the operational things. So hope you enjoy this one. Please do like, subscribe, and follow along. And then as we move into 2024, hopefully we can make some more progress and try and get down onto this lower deck. So we have the Empire Builder parked up here in Seattle, ready for its eastbound departure. It's cleared all the way through to Skykomish. So if you're new to the channel, this is also somewhat of a walkthrough as to where we are in terms of progress on the layout. So up front here we have Union Station. So we've got 2 mainlines that will pass all the way through, and then there's 1 platform that just kind of dead ends there. King Street Station is then here on the back, 2 mainlines that will run through and platforms for them, and then there's another 2 platforms that will just kind of dead end and finish there in Seattle. So this is a freelance layout. It is based on the prototype running from Seattle out to the Spokane area, mostly following the Great Northern Line that would run up through the Cascades. So it's taking a lot of inspiration from the prototype, but it is very much freelance, and so there's a lot of modeler's discretion that goes on here. Now, as much as I would love to take out the actual Great Northern Empire Builder until Lowell Smith brings out another couple of the dome cars, hopefully early next year, they are my problem children, and I can guarantee that they will derail at some point as we move around here. So instead what we're going to do is going to take out the modern day Empire Builder. It's an all-cardo set led by a pair of P42s, and then I think it's 10 cars all the way through it. So I haven't shown this on the channel before, but I thought, well, it's still the Empire Builder. It's still pretty nice to run out. Now, one thing that we will find is that none of my frogs in the turnouts are powered, and so sometimes these locos want to have a little bit of a slowdown, a little bit of a stall out as they go through those, which is a little bit odd because they should be all-wheel pickup. But I think what ends up happening is it's just enough of a power drop that because it's such a long trend with those 2 locos that are fairly big and fairly heavy, it just bogs down a little bit. So let's get the Empire Builder ready to go out. We'll talk a little bit about the layout as we go around, kind of where it is right now, what the plans are for the future. And so again, if you're new, then you get a bit of a walk around. If you've been with the channel for a while, then you'll get to see the trains actually run from Seattle all the way across the upper deck, through that helix to the middle deck, and then out to Skykomish, which conveniently is actually just right here below us. So we're going to pick up our train here as we leave Union Station, and we're going to head eastbound on the layout, but we're actually going to be going north out of Seattle here. So if we look at the prototype, that's basically what we do. You head north out of Seattle up to Everett, and then you start to make your way eastbound. So north of the stations, right as that trailing car is kind of transitioning onto that cleaner piece of boardwork, is where you head into the tunnels. So here the lead locos are just about coming into where the tunnels are going to be. And this tunnel takes you underneath downtown Seattle. So obviously we don't have any of that modeled. None of the scenic work is done here on the layout. I've just focused on getting those main lines put in place. But all of this right here, trends are going underneath downtown Seattle, inside that tunnel, and so as you leave the stations, you'd head into those tunnels, and then pretty much all the way around the end of this peninsula here, trends aren't going to be visible to the engineer. It pops out there, so you know you've got about half the trends probably is outside of the tunnel. That trailing pod is still inside the tunnel now. So this is over on the other side, and locos just come out the tunnel a couple of car lengths or so ago, and the turnouts that are just right around there where the locos are, that's crossing over between the two main lines, because Inter Bay Yard is what is actually coming up here on the right hand side. That's what the loco is starting to make its way past now. And so all that stuff on the left hand side there is where roundhouse, maintenance facilities, car shops, things like that are going to be. It's the south side, west side of Inter Bay, depending on how you want to look at it. And in the prototype, it's actually way at the far end of this peninsula. It's on the north end of Inter Bay Yard for real. But we're taking some amount of modeler's discretion here. So we'll have 3 or 4 tracks, each for receiving and for departure. Have caboose tracks. We'll have some refueling facilities and things like that along the way. And in total, this center peninsula is about 25, 26 feet long. It's a fairly long run, and the actual yard lines themselves will end up somewhere in the region of about 14 feet. So the Empire Builder is starting to make its way up to the north end of Inter Bay Yard, just right around where the locos are now. There's turnouts that take you into that north side of Inter Bay Yard. Drop down just a little bit as we start to come around this curve, and we're going to cross over into running along by the Puget Sound. To do that, we have to get across the Salmon Bay Bridge. Again, the bridges aren't modeled, same as the scenic work. We just got nice plywood Empire bridges in place to give some idea of what that Salmon Bay Bridge is going to look like as the train makes its way over onto the other side and starts to run along the Puget Sound. The nice little scenic shot once the actual Salmon Bay Bridge is built in place. Interesting bridge, kind of a bascule type bridge. One of those bridges lifts up. There's then an approach girder span. One bridge that will pivot up and down. Another one of the bridges will stay in place. Still back and forth on if I'm going to scratch build that. If you have a good friend Keith Lyons out in the Pacific Northwest has shared information on a modeler out there who did scratch build one from brass, or I might kit bash some of the Wolfers kits. We'll see. So here as the train gets over Sound Bay Bridge, now we come into about a 12-foot long, 14-foot long section to be running along the Puget Sound here. So there's a couple of turnouts right around where the locos are now. You can see the green wires hanging down for where the frog power we're going to be. And so this is now snaking its way down, gradually descending a little bit so that by the time we get to Everett at the far end of that freight train, we're pretty much down on the flat. But all the way along here, all that open exposed bench work, that's going to be where the Puget Sound itself is going to be water coming up to a little bit of a rock face up to the track. And then between the track and the skyboard, the bluffs kind of come all the way down almost at the tracks. Freight train's just kind of hanging out there. I thought it would be a little bit too much to try and make 2 trains run at the same time. That means next time. So again, this is just a little bit of a visual shot as you get a pretty good impression here as the train snakes its way along the Puget Sound, very much following what the prototype does if you've ever seen photos and videos. The track does wind its way along, and it snakes left, right, meandering along by the Puget Sound here. Coming alongside that freight train that's parked up, 20-car freight train with a pair of F units from Intermountain, I believe that one. As we make our way past the end of the freight train here, we'll see that we're losing the double track mainline. We only have a single track mainline going through, but that second mainline will continue through. And so all this open exposed plywood area to the left of where the train's going through is going to model Everett and Snohomish. A few different industries going to go in here. There's going to be a lumber yard, there's going to be a paper mill. Well, let me a lumber mill first, and then there's going to be a paper mill. They're rough ideas, rough placement of where they're going to be. I'm not 100% on that, which is why that second line isn't put in place. I don't know exactly where the turnouts are going to be in terms of being able to serve those industries, but the idea is that there will be two main lines that will go through. This main line closest to the aisle here is where passenger services will go through. If no passenger services running, then any freight that's just going straight through can certainly come along here too. And that second main line that's yet to put in place, that's mostly going to be for serving those industries in the Everett and Snohomish area. Or if it was just a local train, local freight train, and you want to keep the main line clear, then you can do that. And we're starting to come into the helix now. The locos are just starting to get up into the top of the helix there. And this helix will then drop us down onto that middle deck. I have a fairly extensive video that goes over the design, construction kind of thought process around this helix. It's about 2.5 minutes for the train as it's going through it. Going to drop it down a couple of notches on the throttle as you're going down. If you're coming up the helix, up a couple of notches, kind of like you would do in real life as the engineer of the train here. 3.5 turns in this helix, 18-inch radius. That top ring is at about 2.5% grade. By the time you get to the bottom, it's about 2.75%. A little bit steeper than ideally I would like. Everything's a compromise. You don't have to climb or descend a whole lot. You are only going about 10.5 inches, 10 3/4 inches on the helix itself. And then the plywood section on the bottom where the track comes out the bottom of the helix is in another 6-foot section or so that then drops down to the actual main part of the benchwork on the middle deck. So to try and make this 5 turns, 4 turns, you then get a little bit too close on the helix ring separation. These superliner cars are fairly tall. I've also got some double stacked container cars from Cardo as well, so if I do run some modern locos, even though most of the layout is set kind of mid-1950s through late 1960s, I do have some modern stuff, and so if I try to put in 4 rings or 5 rings instead, lower the grade a little bit too tight. If you then try to also get a hand in there and try and re-rail something if there's a problem. So this works out just fine. Certainly coming down it's easy peasy. Going up it, as long as you got a couple of locos, 3 locos, if it's the actual Great Northern Empire builder, it can make it up that grade just fine. As we make our way along that section, like I said, that's kind of descending down to then get to the height of, most of the middle deck is on this 2-inch insulation foam. And so here we're coming through Monroe, and kind of like Everett and Snohomish, a couple of industries are going to go in here. I don't know exactly where they're going to be, so that second line you'll see is just kind of hanging out there. There's no turnout on the far end here, so it's also going to serve somewhat as a passing siding at 8 feet long. So a freight train could pull off. Just loco stalling out there on the frog on that east switch from Monroe. So yeah, you'd have a freight train that could pull out, or if it was serving a couple of the industries in Monroe, could certainly do that, and then just keeps that main line free and clear for passengers or any kind of freight that's just going straight through. Here we're starting to kind of wind our way a little bit between Monroe, east of Monroe, and coming into Sultan. And so there's fields, farms kind of along the left-hand side of where the loco is. And now this is starting to come across the Sultan River. And so left shot here, or to the right of the train if you sit in the engineer seat, that's where you're going to be seeing the Sultan River join into the Skykomish River. So kind of like the Salmon Bay Bridge, all the bridges along here on the middle deck are just plywood, roughly kind of putting in place where eventually the bridge structures are all going to be. You're also going to have the road, Highway 2, modern day Highway 2, the old Cascade Highway. That's going to be running all the way along here, kind of in between where the track is and where the front of the bench work is. And so there will be a road bridge, and then there will be the actual railroad bridge. And so now as we come down to the end of the aisle here, we're just going to loop around. Not a whole lot. It's actually fairly flat and straight section in the prototype, but us being on a model railroad, we need to come through a bit of a horseshoe. It's about 24-inch radius as we come to the end of the aisles. The same on that upper deck as we were approaching or coming off the Salmon Bay Bridge, about 24-inch radius curves. Come through startup. Now we're coming over the Wallace River Bridge. So it's the truss bridge, and then there's one or two approach girder bridges right around here. Not a whole lot that we would model in startup. Not going to be a whole lot of industries really once you get past Monroe. This is now stalling out on the west switch coming into Gold Bar, which we'll take a look at here. Coming off that Wallace River Bridge, coming into the west switch at Gold Bar. Loco's going to stall out just a little bit, but again, kind of like we had in Monroe, mostly using this as passing siding. So this track is down in place. There's not going to be any industries that are in Gold Bar. The main focus on this layout is not for a whole bunch of operations and switching and industries and things like that. It's mostly rail fanning, to be honest, and I've got other videos that kind of talk about some of the design goals. So it might look a little boring to some, but I think once all the scenic work is done and in place, this will actually all look pretty good. So coming through basically an 8-foot long passing siding in Gold Bar, that big sky blue freight train just kind of hanging out. Another stall as you come off that switch. And as we're coming over here, the road is actually going to drop down underneath it. So just past that east switch in Gold Bar before you hit this bridge, you come out of Gold Bar, and so yeah, the highway that's been running kind of right around the edge of that pink insulation foam, the edge of the bench work, is going to slowly be starting to go down, dip down under here. It's a fairly interesting bridge. The railroad bridge cuts across at about a 45-degree angle. And as the locomotive comes over, here's where it's starting to really get into some tree section now. A bunch of trees building up around here. The road is now on the far side, right hand side of the train from the engineer's seat, and now we're coming across the Skykomish River. And then the end of the peninsula there is to represent the loop as you go into index. Big horseshoe loop of a curve that's there on the prototype to be able to get around index. You can see marked out here on the pink foam roughly, maybe it's a little bit too wide, but roughly where I think it's the Middle Fork, Skykomish River, North Fork, Skykomish River is going to come through. And the bridge itself is actually straight, even though the track curves. So you need to figure out exactly how to model that. But once you've made your way across that bridge, made it out through index, now again, you're going to kind of just snack around a little bit. Somewhere right around there where the local is, the road is going to come over, road bridge drops down, and then tight up against the railroad left-hand side as the train's running here. The road's going to run along, and there's going to be river and Eagle Falls, somewhat cut into that pink insulation foam there. So again, this isn't entirely following the prototype because the road was actually going to be placed on the other side, river will be on the back side, but because of how we're compressing it, we're not actually having the railroad cross the Skykomish River again, because we're pretty much into Skykomish here on left-hand side, just as the train. There's the west switch into Skykomish. And so the Skykomish River is basically where the aisleway is to the right-hand side here where I'm standing, and so there was no easy way to have the river magically appear other than kind of flopping the side of the road. Don't have all the Skykomish built out yet, so the train can't move all the way in, so we get about half of the train into what we have here in Skykomish, and the rest of it is yet to be built. But there we go, made it out here all in one piece. Alright, here we are in Snoqualmie, or at least the locomotive's in Snoqualmie. The back end of the train has not quite made it all the way in because this is as far as I've gotten into Snoqualmie. Right? So there's about 5 feet or so of track lead. We need to get some more of the pink foam insulation to keep on going, but we have made it. This is where we started out in Seattle, in Union Station, right here next to the Milwaukee Road, Olympia, and Hiawatha, and down up to Skykomish. We have met it, and so we'll say we're hanging out here, we're waiting for some other traffic that's coming through the Cascade Tunnel, although really the Empire Builder would never stop and wait for it. But rule number 1, it's my railroad. That's what we're going to say. So hope you enjoyed that little running around in real time. If you just kind of let the train run, it's about 18 minutes or so to get from Seattle around that upper deck through the helix and then down across the middle deck out here to Skykomish. So end to end, by the time the rest of the layout is finished, this middle deck, the helix between the middle deck, and then running along the lower deck, probably be looking at about 40 minutes or so, 35-40 minutes probably total runtime end to end, which is about what I had expected all along. So if you're new to the channel, let's do a real quick whirlwind for a couple of minutes as to what's coming up next. I'm going to finish up through into Skykomish. I'm going to have some kind of bridge, calling it the Foster River Bridge, although it's not. Some kind of trestle bridge going in there. And then we're going to start to get into the west portal of the Cascade Tunnel. Right in this area here, kind of hidden beneath where my 3D printer and some tools are, going to be another helix, very similar to the helix that the Empire Builder just went through actually. That helix was 18-inch radius. This one's going to be much broader. This is going to be much more like 22-inch radius. But again, it only has to climb about 10 inches or so. So it's probably going to be about 3.5 tons because the bench work is all kind of staggered, dropping down, dropping down, dropping down, dropping down. And so the helix itself isn't having to make up a whole bunch of climb. It's, I say, about 10.5 inches over here. And the rest of it's going to be very gradual coming around the benchwork to the lower level. So west portal, cascade tunnel on the middle deck, and then pretty much all this is going to be hidden mountain area, drop down, come out the east portal of the cascade tunnel around here. And so now we east of the mountain, slowly making our way around into Leavenworth. That's going to be down here on the bottom. Not a whole lot that's really going to be on this lower deck. It's really mostly just scenic running. The middle deck, like I had said, was rail fanning along what is the modern day Highway 2. But as we come out of Leavenworth, we're going to swing around and we're going to start to come into Wenatchee. And so Wenatchee is going to be probably the main terminus for freight. So just above it, this is where Interbay Yard was, beneath Wenatchee. So if you're running freight operations, you know, there is going to be some industries out there in Everett, Snohomish, Monroe, but you might then have some stuff that you would want to bring over to Wenatchee, or you might have some produce, agricultural stuff that's coming to Wenatchee and you want to take it over the hill into Interbay, so that maybe as it goes on to some shipping south, north, could then head out onto ships even. So the yard in Wenatchee will probably be a little bit more focused on this side of the center peninsula, whereas the yards on Interbay were a little bit more on that side. So we did have multiple people in here, not too big of a deal. Aisles are 4 feet wide, so there's plenty of room for people to come around, move around each other. As we come down to the end of the walkway here, coming to the horseshoe, and basically Wenatchee will finish here. We're going to have about 10 feet of Eastern Washington, and then say, screw that. And we come into where my trash box is. We come into an area that's dropped down. It's called the Latah Creek Bridge. It probably won't be the actual Latah Creek, but it is going to be a fairly sizable trestle bridge that's going to cross over. One of the lines will cross over on the bridge, and there'll be another line behind it that's going to kind of run along the top of the bluffs, because over here we are now into the west of Spokane, and then Spokane stations themselves are going to be in here. So I am going to condense the Northern Pacific Terminal and the Union Station Terminal together, Union Pacific Milwaukee Road at Union Station together, and then I'm going to somewhat model the island for Great Northern Terminal with the river going through. It won't quite have the waterfall that comes off the end, but you'll get the idea of what it will be. And this is going to be then the main terminus for those passenger trains. This section here, where I've got just a loop of cardiac track for some Japanese stuff, this is actually going to be a return loop that will then bring you back into the Spokane stations, and then raised up just above it, because all this is going to be raised up 2 inches, kind of like we had this section here in Monroe. All this section is raised up a couple of inches, so we can then do some other stuff around it, scenic stuff around it. So the stations here in Spokane, again, raised up a couple of inches. That will then drop down, so the return loop is basically at benchwork level, and then above that there'll be a deck that will have, I'm calling it Hilliard. It's not going to be freight depot or anything like that, but it is going to have some facilities, maintenance facilities, some shops in there, so that east of Spokane you would have some kind of head nod to what was Hilliard, but really it's that you've got a return loop to get back into Spokane. Again, if you are new to the channel, you won't have seen it before, but where we started out here in Spokane stations, there is another return loop over here. So that's what we've got going on here. Big return loops. You'll have somewhat West Seattle vibe going on here. We'll be running along the Puget Sound. Again, modeler's discretion, not really in the prototype. And then there's the turnouts that are controlling that reversing loop, that outer reversing section. And then those 2 main lines come out and then start to branch out as we would get into the stations. Need to glue down one of the turnouts as the temperature change and whatever has kind of affected that. But none of the turnouts are glued down, none of the turnouts are powered for frogs. Obviously none of the scenic work is done, so there's still a whole lot more work to do here. I've been focusing on the main lines, like I've said. Now I've got a little over half of those main lines done, probably a little bit more than that. The hard work in getting the helix figured out is done, and so I think once I will come over and do the second helix over here, famous last words, this one should be a little bit easier because I've already gone through the process of building one of them. And then most of the lower deck is going to be fairly straightforward. It's basically going to be kind of like the middle deck, single line running most of the way around. Wenatchee, I'll kind of skip putting in the actual yard, the same as I did for Interbay, up on the top, and so I'm hoping that by the end of 2024, when we go put it down on video, by the end of 2024, my goal is that you'll be able to take a train out of Seattle all the way on upper deck, helix through the middle deck, helix behind us to the lower deck, and lower deck all the way over through that return loop to Spokane, then make your way back through Seattle, return loop. And so you can do continuous running, although it would be a heck of a thing to have the train doing a continuous run. Like I say, I think you're going to be in for about 40 minutes. From Seattle to Spokane, I know that the return loop out of here has about 6 minutes. The one in Spokane's much closer into the station, but it will probably still be 2 or 3 minutes going around the return loop there. So in the end, if you just put a train on and say go, it'll be probably 50 minutes or so by the time it would get back into the exact same spot in Seattle stations or the Spokane stations. So hope you've enjoyed this one. It's fun to do some running now. One of the other reasons why I'm enjoying somewhat at the moment running this modern day Empire Builder is I can just take the 2 locos off, drop them on the other end, and I can call that good. Whereas the other trains like the Olympian Hiawatha, the Great Northern Empire Builder, I do also have North Coast Limited from Northern Pacific, because they all have the observation cars on and the domes and stuff. If you run them backwards, then visually it looks very, very wrong, whereas it's very easy for me just to put the locos on the other end and go that way. I don't have to try and reverse the entire way up through the helix. This loco will do it, the Olympian Hiawatha will do it, the Empire Builder will not reverse up through that helix because of my 2 problem children, those dome cars. But most of that Empire Builder now has a bunch of Lowell Smith cars on it, very, very nice. He does have domes lined up for Great Northern, for North Coast Limited, and he also has them for the Alaska Railroad, which I'm excited about, although, you know, it wouldn't have actually ran the prototype, but I love the train. I've ridden on it a couple of times, and very nice. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this one. Please do like, subscribe, and follow along so you can see more progress as I get going. I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to end up doing over the Christmas break, if I'll do too much on here, or I might play around with some of the Japanese stuff. Santa Claus might bring me a couple of different things to make it fun over there with that Carter Unitrack Japanese best layout. But otherwise, Skykomish, I used to live right there. Skykomish into the west portal of the Cascade Tunnel in the helix will probably be the next major things that are coming up here on the channel. So stay tuned into 2023 here, going into 2024. And thanks for following along and joining us for the ride. Take care. Be back again soon.